Well, thank you very much, Salil, Sanjay, Mr. Bapna, Mr. Babal. Congratulations to all the award winners. This is a city of entrepreneurs. For a city, by the way, of a relatively small population, because in India even tehsil towns are now a million strong. And a city of great riches, going back hundreds of years or maybe a millennium plus, and great riches around it by way of mineral wealth and great talent most of all. You must have done something extraordinary to get these awards because it must be very competitive. And congratulations to the jury. It must have been a tough job to pick the best, and I'm sure you've done it. It's my honor to be here. It's also a special honor to be in Udaipur. I've known Salil for quite some time now. And I think almost every year he's talked about Udaipur and Udaipur Chamber. And he's been telling me that one day you have to come here. So that day has come. So thank you for doing this, and I am grateful to be here. Now, what is it that you want to hear about? He said very flattering things. He said, I got scared. He said, I know geopolitics, to economics, to sociology. No journalist knows any of this. No journalist knows any of this. Some journalists may specialize in some domains. So they might be focusing on those domains better. So you might say, oh, so-and-so is an expert in this. But even then it doesn't work like that. Even when a journalist specializes in a domain. Because journalists are not economists, sociologists, oncologists, virologists. There was a time for about 2.5 years, all of us pretended to be virologists, right? But we did not become virologists. It started by first trying to learn the difference between virus and fungus and bacteria for most of us. I mean, maybe in that area I was a little bit better placed because my wasted degree, like that of most people of my generation, was in botany, zoology, chemistry. So finally, kahin kaam aa gayi. At least I knew the difference between fungus, bacteria, and virus. So we journalists have a special advantage. We don't have so many basic specialist skills. If you ask me 10 years back, maybe 15 years back, what is the difference between budget deficit and fiscal deficit? I would have struggled to tell you this. But what happened then? Why did I say 15 years? Because 15 years back, in 2008, the global financial crisis took place. And as the global financial crisis took place, suddenly that became the biggest story of the day. Lehman Brothers had gone down. All right, America ka bank ka chala gaya, kya hota hai? But then you figured, first of all, how globalized the financial system was. And also how political the financial system was, how politicized the financial system was. Countries that couldn't handle this well would have just gone down, their governments would have gone down. Governments would have suffered really badly. And then some of us began reading up, just checking out on what had happened in the East Asian currency crisis, almost 15 years before that. And the dot-com boom of 2000, 2001. And also the Latin American currency crisis. So these countries, the currency melted down, economies melted down, and the governments fell. Governments fell, in some cases, sort of revolutionary changes took place from extreme right to extreme right to extreme left and extreme left to extreme right. So we also learned that we think we are political dadas, but underlying politics is always economics. So what do we do as journalists? We start learning about it. I speak for myself. It's not as if I learned any basic and any economics, and I did not go to a refresher course. I've seen the halls you have to coach people, teach people. It's not possible to take time off and go and learn like this. the advantage we journalists have, and that makes us, places us in an extraordinary situation of advantage. That is that we always can find access to people who know better than us. So if I wanted to learn about what was happening with global financial crisis, I could go and meet Dr. Subbarao, who was the RBI governor, Dr. Reddy, who was the outgoing RBI governor, or Montek Singh Ahluwalia, or Dr. Rangarajan, Mr. Chidambaram, all these people who were managing the economy. And then you knew what to read. So you could read from international publications, also reach out to some people you might know internationally. So the advantage we have is we can reach out to people who always know better than us. That is what journalists are. Journalists access people, and people are generally open-minded, open-hearted, large-hearted with them and share information. And nothing signifies then better than what happened during COVID. As I told you, most of us couldn't tell a virus from a bacteria and a fungus, and even someone like me who might be able to do that did not know what a coronavirus is, and did not know how does a common cold virus differ from a flu virus, which differs from a coronavirus, and which might differ from an HIV virus or a smallpox virus. Why do some viruses mutate more? Why do some viruses mutate less? How come the discovery of one vaccine almost more than 200 years later, the smallpox vaccine? The story of the smallpox vaccine is a fascinating story. It is because the gentleman Jenner who discovered it, he saw that in his village in England, young women who used to milk cows, they were not catching smallpox. And then he started working backwards on why this was happening. And then he realized that most of these women were catching something from the cows that gave them a few marks like smallpox. But these went away, and then they didn't get smallpox. So there was no way of checking out viruses at that point. Microscopes were not good enough. But there must be something that the cows are giving these young women. That then further going backwards, the human mind, he figured that cows used to have also this pox-like marks. It was a sickness. So that got named as cowpox. So okay, if you are exposed to cowpox, you are not exposed to smallpox. Smallpox was the biggest killer of mankind in the world at that point. So can you take out a little bit from these pock marks on these cows and inject into a human being? It looked like it worked, and that's how the whole idea of smallpox vaccine came up. But for 200 years, that basic vaccine, it's gone through improvements, but the basic vaccine is the same. You infect an animal with smallpox and take this out. Now it's a killed virus, it's not a live virus, and you inject. Just injecting that vaccine had finished smallpox worldwide by mid-70s. So anybody who is under the age of 50, I would say, or maybe under the age of 45, would not have those 2 or 3 marks that people of my generation have on our left arm, right? Because all of us had smallpox vaccines. Since 1975, 76, we haven't had to have any smallpox vaccines. In fact, so much so that this even features in Pathan, if you've seen the film, when somebody says कि ये चीज़ बनी है, रक्त बीज बनी है जो smallpox की तरह vaccine है, and Deepika Padukone is more knowledgeable than most people on virology, and she says smallpox का तो vaccine कब से निकल गया और smallpox was ready to be, and then he says उसका हमने एक mutant बनाया है. उसका एक short answer है कि smallpox का वायरस ऐसा है कि उसका म्यूटेंट बनता नहीं आराम से, बनता होता तो अब तक बन गया होता. So these are things that we learned at that time, and once again top virologists in the country, even globally, top public health experts, they were all available to journalists. So it's not journalists as in me, I'm one of the tens of thousands, but also the best journalists in the US, in Britain, in Financial Times, Economist, New Yorker, New York Times, Washington Post, BBC, CNN, they all learned about this from real experts. So again, our real privilege is that we can reach out to experts and experts open up to journalists. So anything we talk about, anything I talk about, even politics, I wasn't born with any knowledge. College in India, at least until the time that we went to college, it's not that much better right now also, barring some specialized professional colleges. If it was better than that, then so many of our security guards would not be holding postgraduate degrees, even PhDs, right? Look at, I don't know how it is in this state, it can't be any better than say UP. UP, if they advertise for 5,000 peons, maybe a crore people apply, and you will have a smattering of PhDs and masters and etc., etc., etc. So the education, formal education prepares you of very little. The last thing it prepares you for is to understand national politics, because our curriculums, even our political science curriculums, teach you very little about contemporary politics. And what they teach you about past politics is doctored. It's doctored depending on who's in power today, and what curriculum they are writing for you. This is very true of history either. So what you do is you learn on the job. So anything that a journalist talks about is something that he or she or they, आजकल का proverb they होता है, he or she or they learn on the job, right? Having come to proverbs and wokeness so early in this talk, let me just make a point, which is not a point of criticism but an observation. Just look at this hall. In fact, I did a physical count in a hall of the most brilliant entrepreneurial people in Udaipur. I counted 12 women, right? So that is something that I think you might want to address going ahead, because say if I was in Bangalore, the balance will not be even, but it will be much better, or as they say in America sometimes, in American politics, much less worse than this. So coming back, what is it that lies behind everything in our lives, particularly in democracies, but everywhere, even in North Korea, right? What lies behind everything in our lives is politics. How will we be born? Do our parents to be have the right to abort us as fetuses before we are born? What vaccines will we be given when we are born? What schools will we go to? What will we study in our schools, or your children or grandchildren study in their schools? What colleges will go to? What will the colleges teach? Can they go overseas to study? If they go overseas to study, can you legally fund their overseas studies? When they come back and when they finish their school and college, what kind of job will they get? How many jobs will be there? How will what they earn be taxed? All of this comes, and again, how will they retire? What will happen to pensions? See what's happening with pensions and politics in your state right now. Your state has set, if I may say so, and you can all disown me, your state has set the worst example for the country by going back to the old pension scheme. And now, see, nobody can stop. See, what Victor Hugo had said, nobody can stop an idea whose time has come. But in a political environment, which is all our environment, nobody can stop a bad idea whose time has come. So old pension scheme is a bad idea. And again, the rule of highly politicized situation is that once somebody brings in a bad idea, brings back a bad idea, the next guy will make it worse, right? And the next guy will make it even worse, unless by that time it becomes completely unaffordable. So he's not able to pay. I suspect by the next guy, it will become unaffordable. And some corrections will have to be made. And then you will need leaders of great perspicacity, like we had a combination of Atal Bihari Vajpayee, followed by Manmohan Singh, who created the new pension scheme in 2003, 2004, UPA ran with it, and it's been like, I know that people around Dr. Manmohan Singh, he himself, people who understand this, they are disappointed that this is happening. But why is it happening? It's happening because of politics. So also what we learn about politics is purely from experience. It's purely from experience. It's from knowing politicians, getting to meet politicians, understanding politicians. And I can tell you something from my experience. You know, everybody likes to make fun of politicians. You see, it's TV channels, right? TV channels. Was there a clock here? I can time myself. No, I'm just checking. These TV channels would be nowhere but for politicians, right? I don't know who watches them anymore, because everybody knows Sham ko kya aega, right? But still, if there were no politicians, they'll have nothing to say or do. And yet, they are always mocking politicians. Mostly, they will not mock politicians of the ruling party, but they'll mock politicians as a class. So many of them will say, Neta log aise karte, Neta aa rahe hain. It's a generic term of abuse for politicians. The fact is the opposite. India's politicians, I mean maybe internationally also, but I know India's politicians. India's politicians are among the most talented, most hardworking, most self-effacing human beings, and they live in the most meritocratic environment. Because unlike an IAS officer, IPS officer, IRS officer, railway service officer, people who once they get selected, once they crack a very tough competition, then the life carries on after that until the age of 60, if not beyond. In fact, आजकल तो सबको extension ही मिल जाता है, and so many regulators' jobs have opened up, from Electricity Regulatory Commission to RERA to Information Commission, etc., etc. But in politics, you are tested. At least you have to pass a UPSC at least every 5 years, right? If not earlier. So before you finish celebrating a victory, you are beginning to worry about losing the next time. And in the old days, losing would not be so bad. You sat in the opposition waiting for your turn. But now losing can mean visits by the agencies, right? So now there's no such thing as a peaceful time after you've lost power. And that applies across the political spectrum. So these are important things that we need to understand when we say politics. And that's where, when we look at where India is right now, where India is headed, where India has been headed for the past, I would say 35 years. And the reason I say 35 years, it is actually, I could say 34, but 35 years, and I'll tell you why. 35 years, all that is determined by how India's politics has evolved. Why did I say 35 years? I could have said 32 years, right? 32 years is when economic reform began. So in terms of our economic turnaround, 32 years is a good period. Because 32 years back, for about 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, India was in about the same situation that Pakistan is in right now. That India had foreign exchange for just a few weeks of imports, which means India would have had to default on its foreign exchange payments. India had not gone bankrupt internally, but just the deficit of current account, foreign exchange payments, loan repayments were so much that India would have defaulted. And a country defaulting, a sovereign defaulting, has disastrous effects because your bonds collapse, your credibility collapses, nobody takes your sovereign guarantee seriously, etc., etc. So India was in the same situation. But India had politicians at that time who got together and they said this will not be allowed to happen to India. Now all of us give credit to Narasimha Rao and Dr. Manmohan Singh, and that credit is due to them. So people from Pakistan have been calling me, Pakistani TV channel, saying, "Sir, आप 5 मिनट हमसे बात कर लो कम से कम, ये बता दीजिए कि इसी सिचुएशन में इंडिया ने कैसे संभाला था और हम क्यों नहीं संभाल पा रहे हैं।" तो उसके लिए मैं सबको बोलता हूँ कि मैं आपसे बात नहीं करूँगा, आप भी मुझसे बात नहीं करिए, क्योंकि आप में और हम में एक बड़ा फर्क ये है, आप बहुत तेज देश हैं, लेकिन आप में हम में ये फर्क है कि we are a real nation, you are not a real nation. Because a real nation believes in its own destiny. It looks within, it figures out what my problems are, it looks at what my opportunities are. Why do I call Pakistan not a real nation? I have traveled more in Pakistan as a journalist than any Indian journalist. Any Indian journalist. Between 1985 and 1993, in fact, for one period, I had an unlimited entry 5-year visa to Pakistan. Mr. Nawaz Sharif was Prime Minister. He said, "My friend will come and go anytime he feels like," right? And they took a cabinet resolution to do it. Because I figured over time that it's a very talented country. It's a country filled with talented people. They got the best lands in North India. They got the rivers, they got the waters, they built these huge irrigation projects which were funded by World Bank, etc., etc., also partly by India as part of the Indus Waters Treaty arrangements. They had better per hectare yields than India until about 15 years ago. When I went to Pakistan for the first time in 1985 as a reporter, that is the first time I went to that country, my eyes popped out and I got a complex. Yes, ये मुल्क तो हमसे इतना आगे निकल गया. Everything was better at a quantum level from India. They had modern cars, they had modern hotels, they had modern telecommunication, most importantly. So to file a story those days, I don't know how many of you know, I mean, some of you would be familiar with telex machines, right? So we used to go to telegraph offices to file our stories on telex machines, and all of us had learned to operate telex machines. And we used to then have something called an International Telecom Authority card. So ITU, the International Telecom Union in Switzerland, it's a UN body. They used to issue these cards to journalists through their organizations. So you could use these cards to use telegram or telex from anywhere in the world back to your offices, and your company was billed at the end of the year through your country's telecom organization. So I went, my first visit to the telecom post office, basically, with the telegraph office on the side in Lahore, and my eyes popped out because we had this terrible Hindustan teleprinters machines, manual, tack, 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 tack. They could bust your fingers. आजकल लोग BlackBerry thumb कहते हैं, हम लोग के fingers तो तभी bust हो गई थी. And the Pakistanis had these beautiful French Sega machines, all electric, like that. Pakistanis have gone far ahead. Ordinary Pakistanis you met were better fed. You went to their homes, you knew that they were better off. Not just rich people, not just, there was a stereotype in India that Pakistan is rich, very rich, गरीब ऐसे ही हैं. But there was nearly no starvation. There was absolutely no pavement dwellers. At that point in 85, a lot of Indians in the big cities were found on pavements. Nothing in Pakistan. Your taxi driver will take you home and feed you a nice meal, decent meal, as long as you were not vegetarian, right? So I came back. I was very young at that point, and I kept on reflecting कि ये लोग इतना आगे निकल गए और हम लोग इतना पीछे कैसे रह गए? That was the question. Then later, as I learned, I consulted people, I talked to people who were smarter and wiser. I understood that even the data supported what I had seen anecdotally in my many visits. Their highways were better, their airline was better, their airports were more efficient. Everything was better than India. Everything. क्या कहानी क्या है? So if you look at the data, you can go to the World Bank website now and look at GDPs, per capita GDPs. In 1985, Pakistan's per capita GDP was 65% higher than India's. 65%. So if the Indian per capita GDP was $600, Pakistan's was almost $1,000. And that showed in everything. That showed in everything. How come Pakistan has this trouble now? How come Pakistan is now desperately waiting for every new ship of grain to arrive from Ukraine and Russia to feed its people wheat, right? Why are people in Pakistan chasing after trucks carrying atta, wheat flour? Again, look at the data. The data will tell you that a country which had an advantage, a head start of 65% per capita GDP above India is today 40% behind India on per capita GDP. How did this happen? Did India do this to them? India has focused on the economy and our economy has grown. But we did nothing to destroy Pakistan's economy. Why did Pakistan's economy get destroyed? Pakistan's economy got destroyed around time, say, when my eyes popped out looking at this big difference positive difference between Pakistan above, India below. And ordinary Pakistanis would tell you, आपके मुल्क में तो सर गुर्बत बहुत है, गुर्बत is extreme poverty. आपके इतनी गुर्बत क्यों है? आपके शहरों में लोग सड़कों पर क्यों सोए हुए हैं? आपके झोपड़पट्टी में लोग भूखे क्यों मर रहे हैं? वगैरह वगैरह वगैरह. It was in 84, 85, say I would say beginning around 1982, 81, 82, that Pakistanis began to think that they had found a new leverage with the world. What happened at that time? In 1979, the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. As Soviets invaded Afghanistan, came the Americans to fight the Soviets because they thought that just as we were trapped in Vietnam, we can trap the Soviets in Afghanistan now. That was the peak of the Cold War. As the Americans came in, so did the Western world, Europeans, to help the Americans. But more importantly, because the fight was through the Mujahideen, who was Sunni, Islamic and Wahhabi. The Saudis came in. The Saudis came in. By that time, China-Soviet relations had also gone bad. So the Chinese also came in. So everybody combined to fight the Soviets to trap the bear in Afghanistan. None of that would have been possible without Pakistan's help. Because in any case, all the leaders of the Mujahideen had been living in Pakistan. They were brought up by Pakistan. They were trained by Pakistan because the regime in Kabul was seen to be pro-Soviet and pro-India. So all these people, just as the Taliban were later trained, Pakistan was training them. And these were available. All access to Afghanistan was through Pakistan. Because Iran had already had the revolution, right? Iran wasn't available, that route wasn't available. So Pakistan realized that now there is rent to be had. And then they started collecting rent on this jihad. And they got even more heady that money came in. By 81, 82, Ziaul Haq, who was ruling Pakistan, he realized that the Soviets were losing. The Soviets were losing, and then he convinced himself that the approach that the allies against Soviets have used in Afghanistan, which is keeping your own soldiers out, no American, no Pakistani, no Saudi, no Chinese, no German, no French soldier got involved in Afghanistan. But finding the wherewithal to find locals who will fight. And with that, destroy the second biggest superpower in the world. In fact, the second superpower in the world, there were only two. And he thought this was going to succeed. And he thought if this succeeds, and I am key to it, and I have the skills, and I'm learning more skills, particularly my army and ISI, I can use the same tactics against India. So it is around 1981-82 that the idea of using terror as an instrument of state policy vis-a-vis India started. That is when, in my humble opinion, Pakistan's economic decline started. Because what happens? Once you create these forces of fundamentalism, once you raise these forces, they suck into your society. Your society gets divisive, so you have Shia-Sunni issues, you have issues with Ahmadiyas. It was around that time that Ahmadiyas were declared apostates, so they couldn't call themselves Muslims anymore in Pakistan. And then separate mosques, separate graveyards, all that stuff started. And also, this is when your talent starts leaving the country. Because modern, educated people, particularly those with knowledge of technology, science, medicine, they say that, look, if my country is going this way, what will be the opportunity? So flight of talent and the flight of capital takes place. So this is the 30, in Pakistan's case, about 40 years that they've invested in building terrorism and militancy as an instrument of state policy to fight a never-ending war with India. But why have they done it? I started this because I wanted to explain to you, why do I tell my Pakistani friends in the Pakistani media that I don't think you are a nation anymore? Because although there was a time, if you Google my writings, you will find me disagreeing strongly with people who say that there is no nationalism in Pakistan, Pakistan will break up. I say no. Over time, a strong nationalism is built in Pakistan. And the fact is, a strong nationalism is built in Pakistan, but around the wrong idea. And the wrong idea is, we are a nation because we are not India. Right? And if India is prosperous and happy, and if Muslims in India are prospering and happy, then Pakistan doesn't need to exist. So it is that issue that has driven Pakistan's politics. It doesn't matter who gets elected. It doesn't matter which general takes over. So until they make that fundamental shift, that we are a nation of 23 crore people, among the largest nations in the world, sitting on a very important and very valuable geostrategic real estate, right? Look at Pakistan, where it's located. Pakistan's real strategic asset is its location. Unless we focus on ourselves and we stop defining ourselves as not being India, or constantly in terms of who's better, you will have no future. And until then, you will not be a real nation. Now, what I'm saying to you is not a digression. Because 85, 86, 87 was a very crucial period in India as well. 84, Rajiv Gandhi came in, Congress came back under Rajiv Gandhi with the highest majority anybody's ever won in India. That's 413 odd seats for his party. In fact, after that election, Rajiv Gandhi had said that for the opposition now, we have declared the 10 plus 2 plus 3 system. So 10 were Janata Party, 2 was BJP, and 3 was socialist, right? 10 plus 2, उस ज़माने में स्कूल भी शुरू हुआ था 10 plus 2 plus system, school college में. So that's what he said. In 85, he did very interesting and important things and good things. His best year was 1985. And among the things he did, besides building Texas Instruments, allowing the import of computers, inviting the French president, holding that laser show, making people more aware of technology and how the world was changing. Most important thing he did was he tried to repair India's politics. And in fact, as we were driving, and I was telling my wife yesterday, listen, ये जो guest house है, inspection bungalow है आपका यहाँ पे, just before Lakshmi Vilas, that my first visit to Udaipur was to come to this inspection bungalow in 1985. And why did I come? I used to mostly cover troubles all over. So I was earlier in the Northeast, and now I was traveling often for India Today magazine to Punjab to look at troubles. I stayed in Amritsar during Operation Blue Star. So Sant Longowal, who was the president of the Akali Dal, he was detained here after Operation Blue Star. So this inspection bungalow was declared a central jail, and he was detained here. And one Sikh interlocutor from Delhi, who was working as interlocutor for Rajiv Gandhi, for behind the back channel talks with Sant Longowal, he said, "Maine kaha ji, meri gal kara de, get me to meet him." So he said, "अच्छा आप उदयपुर आते हैं, मैं मिला दूंगा." और मिला भी नहीं सका, अगर हमें परमिशन नहीं मिली तो आप मुझे अपने नोटबुक के ऊपर लिख के क्वेश्चंस भेज देना हिंदी में, और मैं उनके आंसर्स गुरमुखी में संत जी की हैंडराइटिंग में लिख के ला दूंगा. So that's why I first came to Udaipur, and then there's a little elaborate back story to it, that the only place to stay was Lakshmi Vilas, and I didn't have enough cash to pay the bill, and they said that their credit card machine was not working, so they would not. 1985 में credit cards का इतना fashion था नहीं, so that caused its own little crisis. And then when we finally story done, I came to the airport. They said Bombay से flight आती है. Flight used to be Bombay, Udaipur, Delhi, I think, or maybe Bombay, Jodhpur, Udaipur, Delhi. Yes. So that was like, those were like tourist flights. So they touched all the tourist sectors. So that flight came late, and the airport manager who looked out and he said, "Bandera ho gaya. Now we can't take off because Udaipur did not have night landing." Anyway, so that beside, Rajiv Gandhi, sure enough, signed a peace accord, or settlement with Sant Longowal. Right? He also signed peace accords in 1985 with the Mizo rebels, Laldenga, and with the Assamese movement also. After which fresh elections were held in Mizoram and Assam. Congress party lost power. These were great nationalist acts, because with that he finished two great challenges to India's integrity. The third failed because people in Punjab who did not want peace assassinated Sant Longowal within 2 months of the accord, and that was over, and that story carried on till 1993. 1985 also, 1985-6 is when he made his biggest mistake. And that mistake has defined India's politics until now, and will continue to define India's politics. And that was the decision he took on the Shah Bano case. Because in the Shah Bano case, as many of you might be aware, a poor Muslim woman went to court asking for alimony, saying, "My husband has given me too little money." And I think this was alimony for 170 rupees or something. And obviously some activist lawyers got together with her and helped her go right up to Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court said alimony should be allowed. And the conservative Muslim elements then said this is wrong, this is an interference with our personal law. And the older people, Muslim leaders in the Congress party, plus Hindu leaders also who liked the vote bank, they said this will really upset the Muslims. So he actually carried out a constitutional amendment to set aside the Supreme Court judgment. That angered the Hindus. That angered the Hindus so much, and BJP may have been out of power. They may have had only 2 seats in that parliament, but BJP is the classical opposition party. They don't need numbers in parliament. They have street power, they have vocal power, they have the word of mouth, they have RSS workers who can make not just mountain out of a molehill, but mountain out of a nothing. But in this case, there was a molehill. There was more than a molehill. That look, Supreme Court of India gave an order for a poor Muslim woman, and Rajiv Gandhi amended the constitution using his majority to set that Supreme Court order aside. As Rajiv Gandhi figured that he had made a big mistake and Hindus were angry, and he began losing by-election after by-election, he panicked, and that led to his allowing the reopening of the lock at Ayodhya, at the temple mosque site. Until then, nobody knew anything about the temple mosque site. He then, out of a bad conscience and out of... See, when you make one mistake, it sets a spiral of mistakes. So he did that, right? He did that. उसके ऊपर क्या हुआ? सलमान रुश्दी की बुक आ गई. बुक किसने पढ़ी नहीं? India became among the first countries to ban the book. So again, it angered the Hindus even more, right? As it angered the Hindus even more, Rajiv Gandhi went and allowed Shilanyas at Ayodhya. Not only that, 1989 election campaign, Rajiv Gandhi launched his election campaign from Ayodhya with the promise of bringing Ram Rajya into India, right? If you ask me, 1985-86, the Shah Bano case reversal, that's where the foundation of BJP's full majority, Narendra Modi's full majority was. So it was, that's the reason I began my turning point of history in India from 1987. Because 87, by 87, these two mistakes were done. Shah Bano and the Shilanyas and the opening of the lock. And 87 Bofors happened. And 87 Rajiv sent IPKF to Sri Lanka, which went wrong. 87 exercise brass tacks took place, which was a near war situation with Pakistan. Then exercise checkerboard with China, etc., etc., etc. So India's politics began to change. And what started in 87, between 85 and 87, also created a period of, you might call it political uncertainty, I don't call it uncertainty, I call it the coalition era. So between 1989 to 2014, that is 25 years, India was ruled by coalitions. Initially these were coalitions with a very short half-life, right? The worst of these governments, I mean, all coalitions were not bad. In fact, I once wrote an article showing that India's growth rate has been higher under coalitions than under one-party governments. In fact, India's growth rate under coalitions is even higher than it's been under Mr. Modi over these 8 years. But this is something that I wrote about. And I wrote about this after Ajit Doval made a speech that India now needs a one-party government for 3 or 4 terms because coalition governments are bad for the economy. So I said, look at the data, it tells you something else. But among those governments, the really bad government was VP Singh's government. It is the only government in India's history that was weak on national security. Fortunately, it lasted only 10 months. Right? I used to also call them governments for daily wages. So there was VP Singh, there was Chandrasekhar, 4 months of real prime ministership. Then he went out, then he became caretaker. And then there was Gowda and Gujral, etc., etc. Vajpayee's first government, just 13 days. Vajpayee's second government, 11 months. By that time, India grew the maturity of living with a coalition. So earlier on, in the 84-89 period, when Rajiv Gandhi was in power, and Rajiv Gandhi would say, how can a coalition run a country? Coalition governments will be unstable. So George Fernandez said in Parliament, if coalition governments can run in your mother-in-law's country, why can't they run in India? Italy's had coalitions for a very long time. Even now they have one. So India learned to live with coalitions. So Vajpayee ran a full coalition government, then UPA ran 2 coalition governments, and finally now we have a single party government. So India's political evolution went this way. India's economic reform started with coalition governments, with so-called unstable governments. And I will tell you, I will take you back, and this is, this encompasses politics, economics, leadership, everything. When India was in Pakistan kind of situation Pakistan is in today, Indian leadership decided that under no circumstances was this country going to default, right? And if for that India has to ship its gold physically by aircraft to Switzerland, so be it. So India's gold was taken out by the aircraft. These planes flew India's gold to Switzerland so that to back up, so India can raise money, India will not default, right? Who was the Prime Minister? Chandrasekhar. Chandrasekhar had 40 MPs. That was called the government of Ali Baba or Chalis Chor, right? But government of 40 MPs. He didn't think about the fact that he was unstable. He didn't think that he didn't have the authority to be Prime Minister. How could he do such a thing? Shipping great Bharat Varsha's gold out, right? It takes a lot of guts to take that decision. If you think that was gutsy, see also perspicacity and an understanding of the future. We give Dr. Manmohan, we did give P.V. Narasimha Rao the credit for making Manmohan Singh the Prime Minister. Where was Dr. Manmohan Singh, sorry, Finance Minister? Where was Dr. Manmohan Singh when he was made Finance Minister? No. When Chandrasekhar came to power, he realized that India's economic situation was very bad. And he realized that India's balance of payments was very bad. Because Rajiv Gandhi in his last 2 years had imported too much. So he reached out to the man called Manmohan Singh, who used to be a socialist left economist, head of the South Commission, but a man with great intellect. So he had Manmohan Singh appointed as chief advisor to Prime Minister on the economy, but he was given a position, a status to attend cabinet meetings. So under Chandrasekhar, Dr. Manmohan Singh had already started attending the cabinet meetings. So when he became finance minister, he was ready because he had all the data, he had all the plans. And who would tell you all this in detail, and how do I know all this in the detail? Yashwant Sinha would tell you all this in detail. Because Yashwant Sinha was Chandrasekhar's finance minister. Right? And Yashwant Sinha is a former IS officer who Chandrasekhar talent hunted and made him finance minister, and he worked with Dr. Manmohan Singh. So when you look at all this, you know that your politicians are not all bad. Right? Your politicians are very smart people, and they are mostly very patriotic. And Chandrasekhar, who had many other problems with him, right, came 10 on 10 on this count. And I can give you more examples. 1990, January, the Gulf War started, the first Gulf War, when Iraq had gone, Saddam Hussein had gone and occupied Kuwait. And the Americans were leading Operation Desert Storm 1, right? A lot of the American aircraft were to fly from Diego Garcia, which is way down south in Indian Ocean. For them to reach in the Gulf, they had to refuel, right? And many of these are big aircraft which can't be refueled in mid-air, like say what we now have C-17s, but whatever the equivalent they had then. So they had to refuel someplace. They refueled in Mumbai, in India. Who gave them the permission? Who gave, in 1990, when Cold War had just ended, American Air Force aircraft, military aircraft, the authority to refuel in India? It's Chandrasekhar who did that, lifelong socialist. And Congress was very upset with it. He was only in power because of the Congress. So, I can give you more incidents. Saifuddin Soz, the Kashmiri politician, read his book, and this is something that he said, he described in detail in a walk the talk interview with me also. Saifuddin Soz's daughter was kidnapped by militants in Kashmir. Now I remember one more Kashmiri leader whose daughter was kidnapped by militants in Kashmir. Mufti Saab. Right? Now Mufti Saab's daughter was kidnapped just as VP Singh government had come to power, and Mufti Saab was its home minister. Right? It took a lot of doing for her to get out, and to get her out, a lot of militants were released. Many of those militants gave India a lot of trouble in the following decades, led to the deaths of many Kashmiris and many soldiers, many innocent Kashmiris also. This was replayed within a year of that, in just about a year of that another senior Kashmiri politician's daughter was kidnapped. Chandrasekhar called Soz Saab. This is Soz Saab's story. He said, don't worry, I'll do something about it. Chandrasekhar got on the phone and called Nawaz Sharif. And he said, हम लोग आपस में लड़ते हैं, पर एक दूसरे के बच्चे पर हाथ नहीं डालते. तो ये सोच साहब की लड़की है. In 24 hours, she should reach home safe. And Nawaz Sharif made a commitment, and the fact is that he delivered on it. right? She was back home in 24 hours, and that's something you can find the account from Sosa. So then you see how India progressed from there and how India's neighborhood progressed. And again, they are contrasting stories. You can see where Pakistan has progressed, went down, but you can also see where China has progressed. China has done much better than India. Not because they have dictatorship, but they had much better thinking and much fewer of their earlier fixations. In India, we always had fixations. So anything new that any government tried to do, the others would not just oppose it because they were in the opposition, but because they genuinely thought this will cause a disaster. The Chinese did not have these confusions. So while we did open up, we were not able to get the same pace. At the same time, we gave ourselves the gift of stability in democratic politics. And that is what India's biggest strength is. So I know that we'll need some time for questions. So I will just, on the closing note, ask you to look at the history of the world or geography of the world after Second World War. Because all of the world's maps got redrawn after the Second World War. New nations came into being, old nations split, colonies became independent. So you see that end of the Second World War and decolonization, they've taken place internationally at the same time, in the same 2-3 years, say between 1945 and 1952, 53. A country like Egypt became free in 1952, big country like Egypt. So if you look at all of them, tell me how many of those countries that came into being as a result of decolonization and restructuring of the world after Second World War, how many of those countries which are diverse have stayed intact? Check. Soviet Union broke up in 11, and even now Ingushetia and Chechens and some others want to go away. Dagestan, they want to go away. But they have 11 republics already from Soviet Union. Yugoslavia, Serbia, Croatia, Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia, all of these broke out of Yugoslavia, so many countries. Czechoslovakia, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia, so many countries, right? Just see these countries, what happened. Look at all of Africa. All of Africa's map got redrawn. The Middle East's maps are still being redrawn to the extent that the British and the French drew these straight lines on the map. Tera boundary hai, teri boundary hai. No nationalism developed around these, right? That's how ISIS came in, saying that we'll create a country out of 5 of these, 10 of these countries, that will be the caliphate. And that's why you find Shias can't live with Sunnis, Wahhabis can't live with Alawites in Syria, for example. Nobody can live with Yazidis, and nobody likes Kurds, even though most Kurds are Muslims and Sunni. So, again in Asia, look around Asia, most countries broke up that were diverse, right? Not countries that were non-diverse. Even Pakistan broke up into 2. Only 2 countries in the world that were diverse and that came into being in their modern form in that period have stayed intact. One, I don't have any explanation for, but that's Tanzania. The other is India. But look at the level of diversity in India. And this is religion, caste, sects, within religions, within castes, tribes. I mean, 8% of India is tribal, which means India has now 11 to 12 crore tribals. That's not only more tribals than any country in the world, that's more tribals than any 10 countries in the world put together, right? And these are different tribes. The Nagas, who are just about 25 lakh people, are 29 tribes with their distinctive languages and cultures. So for this diversity, not just to stay together, but to become stronger decade upon decade upon decade. That is India's biggest achievement. That's also the biggest achievement of Indian constitution and Indian politics. And that's the greatest gift India has given itself, but also to the world. Because can you imagine what happens to the rest of the world if India went into the same chaos as, say, some of the countries in Africa are going through, Middle East are going through, so they are sending streams of refugees in the Western world. What if something like this happened in India? So what is the biggest tribute to Indian politics, Indian constitution, and I say Indian politics across party lines, is this acceptance of diversity. And that is India's biggest strength. And any country which has tried to fight diversity has lost out. I mean, Pakistan, why did Pakistan split? Why did the Bengalis go away? Because as Ayub Khan came to power, and West Pakistani always had this issue that we are fewer in number than Bengalis, plus we are divided because there is Punjab, there is the frontier province, northwest frontier province, there is Sindh, there is Balochistan. We have 5 provinces. Bengal is one, so they'll vote as one, so they will always have more seats. So Ayub Khan, when he became dictator, he announced a one-unit policy, that the entire country was one state. See what India did on the other hand. You had trouble in the northeast, India created more states. So what? 5 lakh. When Mizoram became a state, they had a population of 5 lakhs. When Nagaland became a state, they had a population of 12 lakhs. Meghalaya became a state, they had a population of 14 lakhs. Because you wanted to use your democracy to give local elites, ethnic elites, small groups their own sense of power and authority. Pakistan did exactly the opposite. So the Bengalis broke away. That is something that India must not try to change. And if any effort is made again to put all of India into a homogenizer and say इसके बाद एक प्यूरी निकलेगी बाहर, उससे हम सारी करीज बनाएंगे, तो वो नहीं चलेगा. And that is why the biggest threat to India also will come. India's biggest strength is learning to live together peacefully in diversity. With its diversity, India's biggest threat also is getting complacent about this diversity and trying to homogenize what is so beautifully diverse. And that's why I always say I contributed a chapter to a book that McKinsey brought out. McKinsey brings out these volumes in each country occasionally. So they brought out one on Japan called Japan Briefing, then they had an India Briefing to which I contributed a chapter, and that concluded with a line which I will conclude with now. And I said, Nehru got a lot of things right, but he got some things wrong, but particularly one. He gave us the slogan unity in diversity. He should not have said it. He should have just said celebrate diversity. Because look around the world right now. The countries that celebrate diversity are the countries that prosper, the countries that rule. America is a good example, but I think India is the biggest example because nobody has diversity like this. In this hall, I can find, once you start talking about diversity, I can find 50 levels of diversity in this hall itself. So I think on that note I will conclude. If you have time, we can take some questions. I think I've taken too long already.